Welcome, friends. My name is Janaki Spickard Keeler. I'm the editor and coordinator of the Pendle Hill Pamphlets, and I'll be moderating our discussion tonight. We haven't done this in-person first Monday lecture thing in 4 years, and we're kind of out of practice, so if everybody could take out their cell phone and turn it off, that'd be great. So a little bit about me. I've been serving the Ministry of the Pamphlets since 2016, first as a volunteer, and then for the past 6 years as publication staff. I'm joining you tonight from Lenape-Hoking, the current and ancestral land of the Lenape people. Since 1930, Pendle Hill has been welcoming friends and others to our experiment in spiritual learning community, and since 1934, we've been putting out our pamphlet series. Tonight, I'd like to welcome our readers, our workshop leaders, our alumni, our board, residents, students, and scholars, the Pamphlets Working Group, our staff, both past and present, our donors, and those who are new to us tonight. One of our experiments is our first Monday lecture series, inviting friends near and far to join us in learning together. We're especially grateful to the Friends Foundation for the aging whose support allows us to continue making our first Monday lecture series and other online offers, free to friends of all ages. I'm very excited tonight to be welcoming Mary Crauderueff and Doug Gwyn.
Janaki, our friends online are asking to speak up, so maybe a little closer to the mic.
Is this better, friends?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay. Before I say a little bit more about our panel, I want to go over a few brief tech aspects. I'm joined tonight by Frances Kramer, Director of Education at Pendle Hill, and Jerome, our current Pendle Hill residents, Kat K-Strong, our Quaker Voluntary Service Fellow, and Anna Hill, the Education and Engagement Coordinator, all working on various aspects of the tech. So if you have any technical difficulties or questions tonight, please message one of the tech hosts who are Frances and Kat tonight, and they'll do their best to support you. Also here is David Butterworth, who ably runs our bookstore. If we inspire you to purchase a pamphlet, or 5 or 10 tonight, the bookstore is open both here and online. Those of you in the barn may have noticed that we're live streaming this video on our YouTube channel, Pendle Hill USA. Only those speaking will be live streamed. In the coming days, we'll send out a link to the recording along with resources from tonight. For those online, our tech hosts have enabled live transcription so you can access closed captioning. We will have about 20 minutes for audience Q&A at about 8:40, so you can write down your questions anytime. For friends online, you can send those questions to the tech host who is named tech host Q&A. For friends in the barn, you've been given index cards, and feel free to write down questions as they come to you. 1 question per card. We'll collect them during the Q&A session. And for any other tech questions, please message Kat. Okay. Mary Crauderueff is the curator of Quaker Collections in the Haverford College Quaker and Special Collections. She's an alum of Friends Central School, Earlham College, and the University of Maryland, College Park, where she earned her master's in library science with a specialization in archives, records, and information management. Since 2009, she has worked for a variety of archives and organizations in the Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Boston areas. She serves on the board of the Scattergood Foundation and previously served as president of the Friends Historical Association. In 2020, Mary was the first visiting Quaker archivist for the Africa Quaker Archives in Kaimosi, Kenya. Doug Gwyn is a former Pendle Hill student, librarian, and teacher. While at Pendle Hill, he has carried out various research and writing projects in Quaker history. The most recent are Personality in Place, The Life and Times of Pendle Hill. And The Gathering of Spirits, the Friends General Conferences from 1896 to 1950. He's the author of not 1, but 2 Pendle Hill pamphlets. I can't compare it. But Who Do You Say That I Am? Quakers in Christ Today, and Pendle Hill, A Place to Be and Become, Reflections on the First 90 Years.
Janaki, if you can keep speaking loudly and slowly, I think our friends will appreciate it online.
I will do my best. I apologize, friends. Okay. A little bit about the pamphlets. Since 1934, Pendle Hill has sought to further its mission through its pamphlet series, originally proposed by Douglas Steer. Pendle Hill pamphlets interpret the living genius of Quakerism to the needs of our times. In February or March of 1934, we're not exactly sure which, we published our first pamphlet, Vincent Nicholson's Cooperation and Coercion as Methods of Social Change. Since then, we have published a total of 497 pamphlets, 2 of which are not part of the numbered series. Our time together will be divided into 3 parts. To begin with, Doug Gwyn will give a short lecture about the history of the Pendle Hill pamphlets. Next, I'll interview Mary Crauderueff about her experience of reading through the entire pamphlet series. And then finally, the 3 of us will have a roundtable discussion where we ask each other questions. We'll wrap up with the Q&A. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Doug.
Thanks, Jen. Well, it's always great to come back to Pendle Hill, and okay, closer still. And is this good? Is this good?
You have to be right up next to it.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's like an ice cream cone.
Okay.
You just take it off.
How's this? Good. Okay. Okay. Well, I kind of think of the Pendle Hill pamphlet series as kind of like the great cloud of witnesses in the letter to the Hebrews. You know, this almost 500 voices, you know, that are encouraging and guiding and inspiring us to press on with the faith and the practice in the present and into the future. So many topics, Quaker history, theology, spirituality, organization, race relations, social testimonies, emergent concerns, biography, leadership, psychology, sexuality, and more. It's really sort of it's part of the pulse of Quaker faith and practice, you know, as it has continued to evolve over the last 90 years. I'm going to find a certain way of tracing through those 90 years and calibrating it somewhat to the shifts in the institution of Pendle Hill as a whole, and how the pamphlet series has reflected those changes at Pendle Hill. It was 1933 summer session, perhaps in this very room where Douglas Steer was giving a lecture on the Oxford movement in the 1830s and 40s in England, a renewal movement in the Anglican Church. And he talked about the Tracts for the Times that that movement published in those days, and suggested that perhaps Pendle Hill should undertake a similar kind of pamphlet series, short things that could be read in one sitting, and would engage the Quaker genius with the challenges of new times. So it took off from there that evening, summer evening in 1933. Board member Anna Pettit-Brumel took up the concern and formed a publications committee, and as Janaki was saying, the first pamphlet appeared the next year, early next year I guess it was. Vincent Nicholson, the author, was AFSC's first general secretary, executive secretary, and it's significant that came from an AFSC leader, because Pendle Hill had really been founded to create a spiritual base for the work of AFSC as it was continuing to expand around the country and around the world. So they were seen, Pendle Hill and the AFSC were two sides of the same good Quaker currency, as Henry Cadbury put it in the 1940s. Two organizations that really needed each other. And AFSC provided various kinds of service and action work for students at Pendle Hill while they were here. So that symbiosis was really important, and it shows in the first 20 years of the pamphlet series often reflect the kind of concerns that Pendle Hill shared with the service committee. As the series
Can you keep,
Okay.
very close to your mouth?
Close. As the pamphlet series unfolded, the interplay of Bible, Quaker traditions, social concerns, Eastern religions, and other sources offered spiritual nurture to friends and many others. It had a really expanding range of readership, so that by 1944, the average pamphlets printings had risen to 3,000, with sales of about 1,000 copies per month. So it really took off, and had a wide readership. Elizabeth Gray Vining in 1941, a bulletin essay, said that the criterion for the pamphlets was that they should, quote, present a point of view which, no matter what the subject, is based on the realization of the eternal ever behind the temporal. And in that sense, all are religious as well as social or political pamphlets. Howard Brinton indeed did compare the pamphlet series to the flood of early Quaker tracts in the 17th century in England. In 1949, Harriman Maurer joined staff, in part to promote the publications more actively. He was a former editor of Fortune magazine, and he used direct mail advertising to solicit subscriptions and Christmas gift orders, so that average monthly sales rose to an all-time high of 3,500 copies going out per month. This first phase began to come to an end in 1949 when Anna Brinton, the director of Pendle Hill, left to work for the service committee on its international division. And Howard Brinton, the director of studies, assumed both roles of director and director of studies at that point, with the help of the newcomer Dan Wilson, who would eventually become the next director of Pendle Hill. Howard kind of distilled the first 20 years of Pendle Hill experience and wisdom in his 1950 pamphlet, The Pendle Hill Idea, which is a beautiful example of his keen intellect and prophetic insight that had developed through his previous pamphlets and also a long series of Pendle Hill Bulletin essays. Pendle Hill's collaboration with the AFSC culminated in the latter 40s with its role in training volunteers for relief and reconstruction work in Europe and Asia. Burbank building was added to the property to help accommodate the some 1,200 people that passed through Pendle Hill in those years. So that was important work. The Brintons left in 1952 for 2 years in Japan, and Dan Wilson took over as director. He really helped define the post-war period in Pendle Hill's history. And interestingly, the Brintons had sort of kept the arts and psychology at bay, at arm's length in the programs, because they wanted to keep the partnership with the AFSC in front and center of Pendle Hill's work, and people engaged with that kind of work while they were here and hopefully into the future. Dan Wilson began to allow a little more of the arts, and it's showed in a 1952 pamphlet by Fritz Eichenberg. Looking for lost my place. Art and Faith in 1952, his pamphlet really emphasized the connection between art and social witness, so that it kind of bridged towards Pendle Hill taking the arts more seriously. He'd already produced his famous Peaceable Kingdom woodcut, which was his reworking of the famous Edward Hicks paintings, and which was becoming an icon of the peace movement in those days. Mildred Tong began teaching art at Pendle Hill. She taught a creative writing and painting classes here, and her Pendle Hill pamphlet, A Sense of Living in 1954, describes her teaching method as she was here in ways that I remember still were being used in the art studio after I got here in the late 80s, of sort of, putting the silencing the inner critic and letting the inner child speak and come forth and be creative in new ways. And that has been a powerful stream of the life of Pendle Hill, and has been expressed through many of the pamphlets since then. Also, psychology began to appear in the pamphlets. Dan Wilson had a particular interest in personalist psychology, Carl Rogers in particular, and Carl Rogers had a pamphlet on becoming a person, a therapist's view of psychotherapy, which was, that was his book that came out the next year. His pamphlet was A Therapist's View of Personal Goals in 1960. Carol Murphy was one of the pamphlet authors that blended spirituality and psychology very well in her 17 pamphlets between 1949 and 1989. That makes a tie with Howard Brinton's total of 17 as Pendle Hill's most prolific pamphleteers. Jungian psychology came a little bit later, mostly beginning in the 60s through the 80s in the pamphlet series. In 1963, Eleanor Price Mather took over for Anna Brumell after 30 years of Anna's being the editor and leader of the publications committee. Eleanor's 20 years guided the Pendle Hill pamphlet series through the turbulent 60s and into the 80s, often emphasizing Quaker spirituality, biography, and Quaker practice as a way of kind of steadying friends through the chaotic times. But also, it's a time when George Lakey's Nonviolent Action, How It Works, appeared in 1963. Parker Palmer's time as dean, starting in 1975, helped articulate Pendle Hill's vision for a post-60s period. His bulletin essay, the Meeting for Learning, kind of reframed the learning experience at Pendle Hill from what had been strongly lecture-oriented to much more interactive styles of learning. And his Pendle Hill pamphlet, A Place Called Community, in 1977, really updated the meaning of community at Pendle Hill and elsewhere. He also brought in new teachers like Sandra Cronk and Bill and Frances Tabor, who were important teachers for several years to come. And Sandra Cronk's Gospel Order in 1991, Bill Tabor's Four Doors to Quaker Meeting for Worship in 1992 are still widely read among friends today. In 1983, Eleanor Price Mather retired as editor after 20 years of service, and she had guided the series through 120 pamphlets, and she was succeeded by Rebecca Trask-Mays, who served for the next 20 years. When I interviewed Rebecca in 2008 for my Pendle Hill history, she described how she worked with authors to season manuscripts from personal statements into ministry among friends. She said that through the 90s it began to get harder to convince friends to publish something that was more than my pamphlet, which Working with Peter Bean, a literature and writing professor at Dartmouth College, Rebecca also led the most ambitious book publishing period in Pendle Hill's history. We published 29 titles, either published or republished in the period between 1987 and 2003. So that was a big expansion of our publishing life. The craft studio continued to burgeon as a place where creativity and faith and social concern would find integration through the teaching of Sally Palmer, Mimi Wright, Carol Sexton, and more recently Jessie White. I'm particularly fond of Charlotte Farbelman's Sink Down to the Seed in 1989, Elizabeth Sutton's Treasure in Clay Jars in 1999, and Jennifer Elam's Art as the Soul Sanctuary in 2018. In 2003, Shirley Dodson succeeded Rebecca as editor and maintained the high quality of the service of the series, which reached number 400 in 2009. Jim Rose in 2013 began volunteering time to convert the back catalog of pamphlets into ebooks, and by now all the pamphlets to which Pendle Hill holds the copyright, which is only a few that aren't, have now been digitized, which is a great contribution to the ongoing availability of the series. Chel Avery was the primary text editor during Shirley's tenure as coordinator for the series. She was succeeded by Carol Holmes Alpern as well, and when Shirley retired in 2016, Chel Avery was initially named coordinator, but had to soon withdraw for health crises, and Janaki came and into full position as editor and coordinator in 2018, and has continued at a very high level the series, for which we are all very thankful. And I hope I stayed within my podcast.
Thank you.
Oh. I was working fast.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Sorry, friends. So we're gonna move into, I'm going to interview Mary about her experience of having read how many of them have you read? All but the last 12.
I've read all but the last 12 of them, so I've read through 2021.
Okay.
Oh, and I also just want to mention, because for some reason it's not in my official biography, which I will be amending tomorrow, but I served on the board of Pendle Hill for about 7 or 8 years. Don't forget that.
I'm sorry.
No,
I should have noticed that too. Okay, so when did you first encounter the Pendle Hill pamphlets?
That's a great question. I grew up Quaker, and so Pendle Hill pamphlets were in the house that I grew up in, alongside many other foundational Quaker texts.
At that time, did you read them, or at what point did you start to read them?
Great question. So I did not start reading them as a child. Amazing, I know. I started reading them probably just like, I don't remember reading them as anything particular until I was in graduate school. I was in school for archives and records management, and I wanted to do the job I'm doing now, so I turned every paper I could into something related to Quakerism and Quaker studies. So I wrote a final paper on comparing Pendle Hill pamphlets, sort of in the thread, sort of like Brenton did, of early tracts to Pendle Hill Pamphlets to blogs and the importance of blogs in that trajectory. It doesn't quite follow because we still have Pendle Hill Pamphlets and there are few blogs anymore, but this was back in 2009. There were a lot more. And so that's kind of when I started reading a set of them, and yeah, I can talk about like when I embarked on the project, but is that another question?
Sure, so can you tell us about the genesis of the leading and how did it start, how long did it take to read all of these pamphlets?
Yeah, so I at Haverford, I started at Haverford in the summer of 2015, and very soon afterwards we started planning for a 2-year renovation, 18-month renovation, and we had a lot of duplicative books. So we had like a shelf that scholars could come to, and they were just duplicative things that people would donate to us, to the collection, but we already had enough copies. Pendle Hill has been gifting the Quaker collection, and I believe Friends Historical Library 2 copies of the Pendle Hill pamphlets for probably since 1934, and so we had a very big collection of them, and I was like, I don't know where these are gonna go, because everywhere has few meetings in this area need Pendle Hill pamphlets, because so many of them have subscriptions and have had them forever. So I asked my supervisor, I was like, can I take these home? Like, maybe I should read these. And the idea really of actually going through and reading more of them is because they're to support classes at Haverford and to support students at Haverford. In particular, there's a class that scholar Emma Lipsansky-Werner teaches, and in her history and principles of Quakerism class, she has every student read a Pendle Hill pamphlet. And I started teaching that class, sort of how to find them. And then students would be like, what pamphlet should I read? And I'd be like, well, there's like 450 of them. Like, look at the index. Maybe you can find something you're excited about. And then I was like, I could read some more of these and actually have more suggestions. So that's sort of how I came upon it. It took a long time, so probably I didn't start seriously until 2018, and I finished in like the spring of 2022. I did the bulk of it. So I read so a lot of the ones that I had from home, I actually took on the trip with me when I went to Kaimosi, Kenya in early 2020, and I asked them there before I brought them if they were material that they would want to have at the theological college there if I were to leave them there. And they were like, absolutely. So I brought 80 of them that I hadn't read yet with me as reading material for the month that I was there. And then I came back, and it was the weekend as everything was shutting down in this area for COVID, and I went downstairs to our collection. So I have direct access to these in our circulating collection, and I went and I just filled up a tote bag with books. And I did that several times during the course of lockdown, that I was able to go back into the building, and so had really good access to read them, and then just read them in a lot of like, I will read 10 this weekend, and then I will have forgotten about them for a month, and I will read a lot more and try to get through them.
So, what did you learn from reading 450 pamphlets? What were the major trends? And what's missing?
Great question. So something I learned is that's a lot of books. And also something so it also happened, it took up a lot of my reading time in that I love my work, I love my job, but at the end of the day, oftentimes I don't want to be reading something more Quaker at the end of the day. I want to turn to some other kind of works. But I also felt pressure to keep going at a certain point. I was like, once you get 300 in, like, you're not going to stop, right? Like, I mean, that's so. There's that. Something I learned is that many of them don't hold up. You know, this is something, we have amazing editors, and I think that we can say from just over the past 100 years, a lot of things don't hold up. And so I actually kept track. I used the platform Goodreads to help me organize all of the pamphlets, which all of them are now up there if they weren't, because I hand put them in. And I rated, they have a rating system of 1 through 5. And somehow, well, I only rated 130 of them, which means a lot of them I just was like, okay, you were good enough. You know, it was a contribution to this world. I rated none of them with a 2, and I rated 6 of them as 1. And I think that those were the ones that did not hold up at all. Or I just found to really not be helpful in my journey. Trends that I found, early pamphlets had a lot of philosophy in them. You know, I think that sort of trends with, you know, what Doug was saying in terms of those early pamphlets. A lot of philosophy, a lot of you know, starting to talk more about the testimonies, and that kind of grows from there. And I think you know, so when I look at the list of the 24 pamphlets that I loved, 18 of those are from 2013 to 2021. So again, maybe there are more from 2022 to 2024, but that trend, I think that there shows something of like the relatability of them. And something that I really think is missing, there's a lot of diversity in terms of gender, and they're definitely more authored by folks that have that, like, when I've sorted them by name, are more male names. But even still, like, I think for a series like this, it's fairly equal. There were definitely times when I would like sort them of like, okay, here's a stack, and here's the like here's 20 pamphlets, and then I'm going to sort them by gender, and then I'll read all of the ones by women because I want to read some of those because they just have a different sense. But something that I feel like on the whole is missing is that there's several. There's a thread of people talking about their experiences going to places in the world. So someone relating their experience of going to to Swaziland with the Peace Corps, what that meant for their like religious and spiritual life. But there are very few, or too few to none, in the under 5 category of the ones that are really written about global Quakerism, and particularly from someone from outside of the US, Canada, and the UK. And so I think that is something that I think about I think this history, as we, you know, we're hearing from Doug, of where it kind of comes from, and also like where we might go. But I think about that, especially in terms of the mission and missionary work of Quakers, who have been in so many different parts of the world. And I really think about that in the past several months of Quakers have been in Palestine since the 1860s. And there is one pamphlet that talks about Palestine and Israel. And that is Steve's, and Steve is here tonight. And and that will be actually, I think, our next lecture and book and book study reading group. But I think that is something that you can say that about many parts of this world, and I think I would be remiss if I did not say that tonight.
Can you keep speaking very loud, very close to the mic?
Sure. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give us kind of the highlights and lowlights? What were your favorite pamphlets? What were your least favorite pamphlets?
My least favorite pamphlets were the ones I couldn't read because they were too philosophical and the words, I'm sure they were words on the page. My brain just does not understand philosophy very well. There were some that I just felt really did not hold up. There's one about homosexuality in the Bible from 1979, which in some ways it's like, well, it was 1979. And it's like, yeah, it was 1979. That's not actually that long ago. There was one about depression and spiritual growth that just did not hit for me. So let's talk about some of the highlights. I think that there are many. So I mentioned that I had 24 that I loved, but I do just want to say that there were 45 that I rated 5, and 60 that I rated 4. Like, on the whole, we're doing great here, y'all. So of the ones that I loved, I think one of my all-time favorite ones is Leslie Hill's Marriage, a Spiritual Leading for Lesbian, Gay, and Straight Couples. I think that for me, this really combines so many different parts of essential Pendle Hill pamphlets. There's some deep ministry around pulling what is marriage and what do Quakers believe about marriage. And so it has a good primer on Quaker marriage and also about the struggle and the leading of Putney meeting. And that's from 1993, and I just really recommend that one. I really also love Emily Provence's Spiritual Gifts, The Beloved Community and Covenant from 2020. I've used that many times. Going back, I really love Margaret Carey's Are Your Meetings Held in the Life? This was part of a series of lectures for the women's problem group of the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And so it focuses heavily on the role of women in a meeting, particularly as homemakers. It's from 1947, so that's the term that she uses. But in my reading, it can really be expanded to people of all genders. And one section I really liked, and I think is a really great component of so many pamphlets, are the queries. And there's the questions at the end as well, but the series of 6 queries at the end of this one are really great for some church nerds like myself that might appreciate in regards to the care of members and attenders. Also spiritual discernment, Patricia Loring's Spiritual Discernment is a really great primer on clearness committees. And Paul Lacey's Quakers and the Use of Power. And this was, I have the wrong publication date in here, but by the notes I say 40 years later, so about 40 years ago, it was written, and it's still incredibly relevant to today on power.
Okay, is there anything more that you'd like to say before we move into our round 2?
If you decide to do this, I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't. We all have our spiritual paths. But if you decide to do that, I would recommend taking a few more notes on each pamphlet, especially the ones that you don't like. I don't remember why I don't like so many of these. because there's a lot of them, and I think that there is a really great thread through here, and I really appreciate it, but I also think it could be a little bit deeper if I think that when I started, if I really thought about the fact that it was really about 500 of them. So, and I also want to say that I have family members that have written 2 pamphlets. My mom wrote one, and my grandmother wrote one, and I just really appreciate the ways in which there are just so many different connections of Quaker life in a lot of pamphlets, and that I really also appreciate how many voices, like, it used to be that you had this, as we were hearing, the same people, like nobody's writing 17 pamphlets, right, like today, right? Like, I don't think that, like, Janaki is, if you've written, I don't know if there is a cap, maybe Janaki can tell us.
Yeah.
But I think that that's something that's really, really fantastic, is that it's not just an in-group of people who are writing pamphlets, and that it's really, really expansive, and that I think one of the reasons why I have so many more that I love from the past 15 years is because of that, is because there's been so much work, I know, by you and your predecessor, recent predecessors too, and not that the early ones weren't doing good work, but I really appreciate and value the diversity of authorship, even when I know that there can also probably be more. Yeah. Thank you.
So if you do decide that you want to undertake this big project of reading all the Pendle Hill pamphlets, we have our index, we're updating our index. We have a complete spreadsheet that is up to date, so please do, it's on our website, you can download that. Okay, so from here on out, we're going to ask each other questions, and some of these questions only one person will answer, and some of them all 3 of us will answer. We're gonna start with one of those, all 3 of us will answer questions. What makes a pamphlet a pamphlet? Who would like to start? I will say that what makes a pamphlet concretely is that a manuscript comes to me, I make the determination that it is publishable, and it's in the 7,000 to 9,000 words range, I also, there's something about a manuscript that sparkles, and it's undefined. We have rarely published one that I don't feel that sparkle, and at one point we were publishing one that I hadn't felt the sparkle, and it wasn't until right before we went to publication that I was like, oh, there it is, it's sparkling right there. I was very excited about that. There's just like this undefined quality. So after I've made that determination, the Pamphlets Working Group is the body that considers manuscripts. They consider them without knowing who the author is, and they come together in a Quaker unity process, and then come to unity. If they come to unity, then it becomes a pamphlet. If they don't, they might ask for a rewrite. They might ask. They might say no. Occasionally, we have fringe cases where we send it out for scientific evaluation if it's a very scientific sort of thing. That's how a pamphlet becomes a pamphlet. Could one of you speak to kind of the history of what the criteria has been?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can say
Let's see.
my own view of the subject.
I did take a couple of notes, so, it's the right length to be read in a single sitting. It's concerned with a topic of contemporary importance, and like words spoken in a Quaker meeting for worship, it embodies a concern, a sense of obligation to express caring or act in response to a harmful situation.
I guess I would follow Rebecca's sense of a ministry, that it should be a ministry of some kind, which could be a range of things. I would get something like John Youngblood's Hallowing One's diminishments. Dimensions or dimension, but diminishments. Has that kind of personal ministry aspect, kind of a pastoral aspect. Tom Gates' pamphlet on membership has been a great help to a lot of meetings in helping understand what it is, what membership is, what they're inviting people into, and as well as the individuals understanding what it would mean to become a member of the meeting. Or Steve's pamphlet on Israel-Palestine as kind of guidance to help those of us that are less informed in our own discernment of larger issues in the world. So it can be different ministry in different senses and different scopes, I suppose. But I feel most touched by those that have that sense of ministry.
I definitely think that it has changed over time. And there's something that struck me about the founding, that they should be a Quaker genius to sit down with. Was that, did either of you say something like that for like
Oh, yeah.
Interpret the living genius of Quakerism.
Oh yes, interpret the living genius of Quakerism to the needs of our time. And I think that is a really, that strikes me in terms of like how I think quote unquote intellectual or scholarly the early ones feel compared to, I think that there is scholarship in many of the more modern pieces. And maybe in 100 years they'll be like, whoa, that was a lot scholarly than it is in 2020, 21, 22. But I think that there's something of like a recalibration as to who is this for. That there's an expansion of who is at this table, and I really appreciate that. That sort of addresses, and I think part of that too is, I can't remember exactly when, but having the questions at the back, that really does invite that conversation, I think to me is a core part of a Pendle Hill pamphlet. And I definitely agree, something that is able to be read in about one sitting. I say we all read at different speeds, and have different brains for these things, but it's a topic that then you might carry with you for a little bit. You're gonna set it down and then you're still gonna keep thinking about it.
Maybe we could talk about what are some of the more unusual pamphlets in the series. I think about the one in German that nobody knows what it's about. Pamphlet number 45. We don't know.
Okay, we sort of know, okay? There's a brief description, it's about democratic living, okay? That is, okay, so I should have qualified. I've read all of the ones through 2021, except the one in German because I don't speak or read German. But I think that is definitely one of the more unusual ones.
I love Jack Shepard's Apocalypso theater.
Yes.
Can't remember exactly, but it was talking about the the Apocalypso Repertory Theater that he was organizing here at Pendle Hill in the late '60s, and reworking Greek tragedies and Shakespearean plays to the issues of gender gap and the anti-war effort and things like that. And it was in this improvisational style where they would even ask the audience, what do you think should happen next? And just great stuff that was so much in the historical moment as well as the edge of the community life. He must have been an amazing drama teacher.
Do you wanna talk about the historical?
Historical.
Avery's, one that didn't quite necessary.
Yeah, Henry Cadbury taught a course on the testimonies at Pendle Hill in 1934, and was focusing on race, and really began to lift up the lack of racial inclusion in the Society of Friends, and it worked into an article that he published in the Journal of Negro History called Negro Membership in the Society of Friends. It also was taken up to be a Pendle Hill pamphlet, but his style was rather dry as a writer, and it was just one unhappy and discouraging fact after another, without much interpretation. The publications committee kind of waffled on it and thought it was too important not to publish, but it didn't seem to be fit within the parameters of a Pendle Hill pamphlet, so they created a historical series of one. Under that title, Negro Membership in the Society of Friends, and this sad history, which then just sort of got conveniently forgotten, and something that we should have kept in front of ourselves. So that's a little bit of a sad story in the saga of the pamphlet series.
There was also a series of three, William Penn's No Cross, No Crown, something by Pennington and Barclay in Brief, that were originally published as a separate series and then got incorporated into the series. Also, we've got a couple of them that have art. We've got Fritz Eichenberg's, he illustrated, put some woodcut illustrations in a number of our other pamphlets, but he has one of his own. Two by Jennifer Elam that include color art, and there's one by Dorothea Bloom, and I don't remember what it's called, but it was sold with a pack of postcards of the art that she is describing in the pamphlet. We don't have the postcards, but we did take them. We went to to one of our Quaker archives. I don't remember which one, Mary, I'm sorry. And we scanned them, so they're on our website now. Would you like to ask the next question?
Sure. I'm the one that gets to ask this question because I haven't done it yet. For both of you, what is it like to publish, to have a pamphlet published with Pendle Hill? You both have experience with that, and maybe if you can speak for a moment about that process.
Yeah, I've published a couple, and but I also had been on the publications committee, and I was always amazed at how a small group of people could have such different impressions of the same manuscript. So I knew that something wild and crazy was happening in both of these, that I was glad that they ran the gauntlet and made it through, because I know that it's a process of listening to one another and beginning to kind of moderate one's views, first impressions, and being informed by other people's impressions. It's one of the most amazing discernment processes I've ever been part of. So I was glad not to be part of the process for discerning my pamphlets.
So I published a pamphlet with Pendle Hill in December of 2022. And it was an interesting process because, of course, I attend the pamphlet working group meetings usually, and it is an anonymous process, but obviously the author shouldn't be involved. We managed to solve that by my being on maternity leave.
All authors should experience that.
Yes. But it was, I think I didn't expect to write a Pendle Hill pamphlet. I got the germ of an idea in February of 2020, and then over the next year, I kept getting these shards of a pamphlet, and I spent quite a lot of time. I had an infant at the time. I spent quite a lot of time writing at 3 in the morning while nursing. And I had the experience of not being accepted the first time through, and having some feelings about that, and then realizing that, you know, it did help the manuscript become much better to take in that feedback and to really rework the whole thing. I rewrote my pamphlet 17 times, and one of them was in the 2 days before we went to press. So I don't recommend that. I am in my role as editor, I don't enjoy it when authors do that. But it was quite a journey, and it was quite an honor. Perhaps we could talk about some of the best-selling pamphlets. I have a list here from David, if I can find it. Okay, so our top seller all the time is 4 Doors to Meeting for Worship. There's a reason it's a classic. So that's number 306. And
What's the date of that, remind us?
92, I would say? Yes, December 1992. There was a whole run. 305 was Spiritual Discernment by Trisha Laurie, and then we had 4 Doors. And then our second bestseller is, I'm not sure if we have it here. Maybe we don't. Our second bestseller is number 307, which is Beyond Consensus on Quaker business process. And I'm not thinking of what 308 is, but it's also a very good pamphlet. So, well done, Rebecca.
Married.
That's Leslie Hill.
Oh, yes, that's Leslie Hill's on marriage. Some others are Tom Gates' Numbers One of Another. And On Halloween One's Diminishments is a perennial classic. Howard Britton's Guide to Quaker Practice, Pendle Hill pamphlet number 20, much revised and much reprinted. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, yes. A newer classic is Hal Weaver's Race, Systemic Violence, and Retrospective Justice, an African American Quaker scholar activist challenges conventional narratives. This was also an honor to put out. We do have a list on our website of our bestsellers, I'm pretty sure. It's a good starting place. Aha, I found beyond consensus.
Isn't that how it usually works?
It is, yes. Okay. Would you like to ask that question?
What have you found to be the most controversial pamphlets?
That's a good question. So within my tenure, we published The Atheist's Guide to Quaker Process. It was a pretty interesting a pretty interesting meeting because almost all of us in that room identified as theists, and our question was, does the divine want us to publish this? And we said, the divine did want us to publish this. And I was still feeling weird about it, and I was praying about it, and then one morning during my meditation, the divine gave me the words of the introduction, and I was like, okay, I think the divine's okay. So we've gotten some criticism for it, but we've also got quite a lot of people saying, thank goodness that you've named my experience, and I appreciate that. I believe that marriage, a leading for lesbian, gay, and straight couples, was controversial at the time. It was 1993. Marriage continued to be a controversial point, continues to be amongst Quakers. Homosexuality and the Bible was controversial as well. And I don't know, Steve, how controversial this one was when it was published. We thought it would be, but I hadn't heard that it was controversial then. I don't know whether it is controversial now.
What's the title of it?
Oh, I'm sorry. Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, a Quaker Zionist Rethinks Palestinian Rights. Speaking to our times.
Oh, yeah, I definitely wanted to ask, what do you like best about your role as editor?
There's a couple of things I like best. We get a lot of manuscripts that we don't publish, and almost all of them have just beautiful parts that I am so grateful to be able to read, even though they don't fit the pamphlet series, or they aren't particularly readable, even if they have beautiful ideas. So that's one thing I really love. I love being in a ministry job. Like, I consider this a ministry, and it's complicated to have a ministry job, but it's also really lovely. And the other thing that I love is that I'm able to bring spiritual gifts to this, that to help people tell their spiritual stories. I am sometimes called upon to use my gifts as a therapist, which is what I do in my time that I'm not working on the Pendle Hill Pamphlets, and to help make the manuscript better by reaching down into what the author is trying to say, and sometimes to help the author process something that or see something in a new way. So I would like to ask the three of us one more question, which is, what is your favorite pamphlet? You want to start?
Sure. I think I touched on this a little bit, actually. I really think that I'm like, well, but this one. So I really love Leslie Hill's Marriage, Spiritual Living. It's really interesting that it speaks to me as someone who never wants to get married. It just really, I think that this is one of the books that really shows that thread of thought of of what is important about Quaker marriage, and in that process, and I think that is really amazing. And I also, I'm gonna have my top two, is Emily Provence's Spiritual Gifts, the Beloved Community and Covenant, that I really think embodies a lot of the reciprocal nature of the community of the meeting and the responsibility we have to each other. And I love using the word covenant in there, that I think really reinforces that relationship in a way that uses terminology that I think oftentimes Quakers have, in like liberal and program Quakers have veered away from. And really it just kind of hones in on why is this important, and it really solidifies that.
I'm also gonna do two, and if you asked me on another day, I would have a different answer, but today. Sandra Cronk's Gospel Order, A Quaker Understanding of Faithful Church Community, gave me a glimpse of kind of what we're aspiring for in community. And Trying to Be Truthful by Chel Avery. Chel Avery was a mentor to me and preceded me in my position, and working on her pamphlet after her death was bittersweet and quite an honor. It's also a really good pamphlet.
Well, if I could choose two, I will also. Jim Corbett's The Sanctuary Church was very important to me when it came out, and his as a non-theist friend was able to really draw the Bible together, and some very keen political insights in out of his experience of being a central figure in the sanctuary movement as a goat herder down in southern Arizona. That's a terrific pamphlet. And one that we haven't mentioned, Bill Tabor's pamphlet, posthumous pamphlet, The Mind of Christ on the Quaker Meeting for Business, that Michael Burkle edited together out of notes that were left that Fran Tabor supplied him.
Just to say, I think I see Michael actually on the Zoom tonight. So hi, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both so much. So we've come to the Q&A portion of our evening now. And a reminder to folks to submit any questions in the chat box to Tech Host Q&A or on your index cards. So we'll take a few minutes for people to write in and we'll synthesize some of the questions. I'm gonna acknowledge up front that we're not gonna be able to get to everybody's questions. I think Anne is going to be collecting the index cards.
Questions, if there's time, I would.
Okay, well, I will start with a question for me and Rebecca. What is the most challenging aspect of the editing process? For me, it's saying no to people, especially when I really love the ideas.
I would ditto that. I took more time writing rejection letters than I did acceptance letters. And wanted to give thorough honoring of what Janaki said well, that there were jewels in everything I read. And nowadays I'm a co-editor for an academic journal at Temple University, and we are forced to use, not forced, but the culture now is a little grid on a platform, a digital platform, where all I do is check off a few things to reject a manuscript, and it always feels slightly wrong to me.
Could we, is somebody collating the online ones?
Can you all hear me? Okay. Well, first, gratitude to Mary for all of your Goodreads submissions. There's some gratitude in the chat here. A couple of friends are asking about the political evolution of the pamphlet content. Have there been moments of tension politically between Pendle Hill, the content of the pamphlet, and or the wider Quaker world? It reminds me a bit of some of what you all were saying around the committee discernment process, and wondering if there have been moments where that or this sort of notion of prophetic witness has come up, but also created tension.
That's a good question. I'm gonna start and then I'll pass it to Doug if Doug has any ideas. So we have a stated policy that we don't publish on current controversies within the Religious Society of Friends, and then that is something honored often in the breach. For example, we did put out the pamphlet on marriage, but we try not to only publish one side of a controversy, even when it's a big controversy that is broadly in the Religious Society of Friends. I got a question about the current circulation. Doug mentions circulation. Our current circulation is much lower than it used to be, unfortunately. So I'm going to ask you to subscribe. All you have to do is go to pendlehill.org/subscribe, and you can get a subscription. We publish 6 pamphlets a year, and I'm excited about some of our upcoming offerings. We usually we only have a pamphlet or two that we know in advance. Right now, we know through the end of the year. I'm excited about all of them. And our subscriptions do come with a substantial discount, so it's cheaper than buying the 6 months separately, which you're also welcome to do to support Pendle Hill Publications.
All right, I got a couple of questions, so I'll start. The question is, will you read the last 12 pamphlets? Yes. I've had a couple other priorities. It's been when I got through that bulk and my brain was focused on some other reading tasks. But it is my plan to catch up, and I do have the privilege with my job that they literally come to my inbox without me doing anything. So my plan is eventually just to read them as they come in. But yeah, and then I did get a question about a pamphlet that says it only has 2 stars on Goodreads, and I was like, I think I rated that 5. There are some that have like multiple things. There's like some weird stuff, but that's what happens when there's like a million pamphlets. Then a deeper question is what does do the Pendle Hill pamphlets, the reading experience, teach about revelation and about authority? And I think for myself, I think it proves the revelation of our story, of the changing of our hearts, of that that authority comes from some kind of a divine or larger entity that guides us as a community together, and that when we listen for that in ourselves and in each other, and that we can really pull some amazing ministry through that.
Okay, I'm gonna do a final question. What is the role of the pamphlets today and in the future? I think that the role of the pamphlets today is to speak to today, not to 400 years ago, to help us kind of hash out where we're going, where we aspire to go. And it is true that if you publish a Pendle Hill pamphlet on something, it is a legitimizing voice, and those on the pamphlets working group take that charge seriously. When we publish something, we not only recognize it as a valid concern for the person, but also for the Religious Society of Friends. Would you guys like to add the role of the pamphlets today and in the future?
I'm sorry, I have a very strict, I did not turn my alarms off, I'm sorry. I think the part of the role of the pamphlets is to have another way, like going to meeting for worship, and is to have another place to go and enter into a time to have that meditative space with the author. So one of the things that I didn't talk about is like, I ended up having feelings about the author, like not like for the author, about the authors, of like really liking them or not liking them. And it wasn't based off of anything except for their pamphlet. But it's a time, like, I think that that it's a connection of being like, I don't necessarily understand this pamphlet, but I think that it says something about where we are or where we were, and I think continuing to do that is a really important practice today, in the different modes that we have it, you know, there's a Pendle Hill podcast, shout out to that, you can also subscribe to that, and you know, having things up on YouTube and just like having various ways of entering into these spaces together, I think is really important in all of our lives, and I see that as an ongoing thing because we do have the ongoing changing of who we are as a body, and what the controversies are happening, or maybe they're still happening from 50 years ago and we need to talk about them again.
I don't know,
That's a good answer.
but I think that, you know, all we can do basically is you know, stay in the present with what comes from friends and others for the possible pamphlets, and trust that that we can remain faithful in continuing this ministry, which you can only do it a step at a time. So we'll let it unfold.
Thank you. Friends, our time is coming to a close. Please indulge me as I lift up a couple of upcoming things. Our first Monday lecture in April will be with Steve Chase on the subject of Israel and Palestine. And our April reading group will be with Tom Gates's pamphlet, Reclaiming the Transcendent, God and Process. And our May reading group will be on Steve's pamphlet. And we also have an upcoming Pendle Hill Quaker Institute, Living Our Testimonies in the Fierce Urgency of Now. That's at the beginning of May. It's an on-campus gathering to explore how we can meet our political moment as friends, individually and collectively. So if we could have a brief moment of worship to close out the evening. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, friends. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for indulging this passion that the three of us share and that many of you in this room and online share as well.
Friends online are unmuted as well now if they wanna say.
Oh yes, friends online, you are able to unmute and say goodbye if you would like.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Have a good night.
Nice to see you all.